Most of us would not consider ourselves to be an easy target for a predator, but we may be communicating signs that we're unaware of. Today's guest is Mike Mandel. Mike's career has covered many different fields, from stage performer, trainer, psychotherapist, martial arts instructor, writer, and corporate speaker. Mike is a well-renowned hypnotist with 18 nominations and 6 awards for excellence in entertainment, and is also considered an expert in the unique martial art of British Jiu-Jitsu. He has trained both law enforcement and security personnel and boasts a diverse client list that includes Microsoft, Scotiabank, and the Department of Defense. He has been featured on both British and Australian television, profiled in numerous publications including Martial Arts Illustrated, I Spy Magazine, and Toronto Star. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. All right, Mike Mandel, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
It is a joy to be here, my friend. I've been looking forward to this.
That's awesome. Can you give me a little background about who you are and what you do and how you got there?
Yeah, I'm a hypnotist and a hypnosis trainer, an NLP trainer, but I'm also a martial arts instructor. I teach a British system, a uniquely British jiu-jitsu system that is used by British Army. And it's basically shut somebody down in 2 seconds. It's not, we don't wear pajamas when we train. We wear street clothes and steel-toed boots and carry edged weapons because that's what happens in the real world. But also, I'm a forensic hypnotist. I worked on numerous cases, armed robberies, murder cases, and so on. And psychopathy is a real interest of mine, having been taken in by one. And I did a lecture in the university and college circuit called Are You Dating a Psychopath? And we run Brain Software. My business partner, Chris Thompson, and I run Brain Software, which is a podcast dedicated to hypnosis, NLP, personal development, all things brainy. So here we go.
That's awesome. That's an incredible background. So you said that you were taken in by a psychopath. Can you tell me about this?
Yeah, I have this thing where I could, not so much now that I'm approaching 68, but when I was younger, I was much too trusting. And I didn't know how to read warning signs. I had not been buffeted by the world very much. So I sort of, I gave people the benefit of the doubt far too much. And I had a business, and my business partner, without my knowledge, was working behind the scenes, and was running 3 streams of income, but I only knew about one of them. And eventually this all came to light, and amazingly, he began to rally people around him, even though he was the one ripping me off. Oh. And strangely, because he was so skilled as a psychopath, people believed him. Or they'd say things like, well, there's 2 sides to every story. And I'm going, well, since he's the one who's been sneaking around and lying and deceiving and taking all the money, how can it be anything but that's what happened? So I was baffled. I couldn't understand how this had all come into being. And the interesting thing is, Chris, I'm a forensic graphologist too. I do scientific graphology. I've done it for different corporate clients, and I teach it. And we have online training in it. But interestingly, we were traveling by plane, and his laptop died. This is before this all came out. His laptop died, and he started making notes by hand. And I saw his handwriting, and immediately some of the bizarre traits of unstable personality, multiple indicators of deceit were in his writing. And I said, what's with your writing? And he crunched the paper. He said, there's nothing wrong with my writing. The problem is you. And he just started yelling at me defensively. And I just sat there on the plane, and he suddenly realized he was shouting on the plane and sort of laughed nervously. And you know what happened? Because I was told when I did my graphology training in the early 1990s, always trust the writing. The writing never lies. It's based on large samples, the same as any other form of psychology, large numbers. What does the writing of alcoholics have in common? The writing of high achievers, whatever. And they said, the writing never lies. And I let the writing be pushed aside by what I knew about this guy. I said, no, he can't be a problem. I've known him for years. He's my friend. There's no way the writing's correct. But a couple of months later, it all came out. The writing was correct. And I found out all the machinations that were going on behind the scenes. And I sat up one night in bed, and my wife said, what's the matter? And I said, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, the stress of this. And I said, I'm trying to figure out, do I go to Toronto East General, which is close, or do I go to Toronto Sunnybrook, which has smart Jewish cardiologists? I'm saying that as a Presbyterian. And she said, you're not having a heart attack. She said, you're under stress. You need to talk to somebody. So I contacted a friend of mine. I did trainings for the Ontario Provincial Police, their behavioral science unit. And I found a colleague of mine phoned him up, and he's a forensic psychiatrist. And he said, come and meet with me for lunch. And I told him the whole story. He said, you've been taken in by a highly functioning psychopath. And I was freaked out and shocked. And he handed me a book by Robert Hare, H-A-R-E. Robert Hare is the world authority on psychopathy. He's out of Vancouver, Canada. And I did a quest and started studying this and realized what had happened to me. And I didn't recognize the warning signs because I didn't know them. And we say 1 in 100, sometimes 1 in 50 people are psychopathic. They'll rise to the top of industry. They're big in churches, the judiciary, all sorts of systems where they're able to use their ruthlessness, their lack of empathy, their drive, and their lack of fear to get very, very high up. And that's what happened to me. So I began doing a college lecture, teaching university and college students to recognize traits of psychopathy in people's handwriting. And it's been a remarkable journey because it's not something I ever figured I'd be doing.
Yeah, I've heard that from a number of people who are in these types of fields, who they ended up in it through circumstances and events that have happened in their own lives that kind of point them in a general direction. But before we get into some of these traits and ways, can you give me the clarity between psychopath and sociopath? Because most of us aren't in mental health fields, and so we kind of don't know what the differences are between those.
Right. My source for this is a friend of mine, Peter Collins. Peter is a forensic psychiatrist. And I asked him that same question. And he said, we don't differentiate anymore. He said, psychopath is just a term that's used across the board. So it seems to be more in TV shows and that there's a big differentiation. But I just use psychopath as the terminology. And, they're varying degrees. Some are very highly functioning, and soldiers are psychopaths. Not all of them, but there are psychopaths in special forces and that enable them to do almost impossible things because they don't have the fears that you and I have or typical people would have. But then there's the others, those who are sold out to the traits entirely. And, it's narcissism out of control as well. Narcissists, some people say, are garden variety psychopaths. It's all about self. And psychopathy, of course, takes it further. I think we'll see more and more of it. I don't know why, but my impression is that it appears to be becoming much more spread throughout the populace. I don't know if we're just able to detect them more easily now, or we're seeing more of them. And they're really, really good at preying on people.
So let's talk about some of these traits. I assume that you talk specifically about handwriting traits, but I assume there are also personality traits that we can see?
Yes, one of them is you'll see a grandiosity, the great expression of self. And they'll gesture in very grandiose manners as they're talking, which is one of the ways that my business partner tricked me. You don't listen to the words, you begin to follow the presentation of the gesture. And they can really lure us in when if we stop and listen to the content and step back. Human beings have, according to Human Givens theory, the ability to step back and dissociate from a situation and look at it from the outside. And that's one of our greatest strengths. We will be triggered emotionally. They size us up very, very quickly. I remember watching a series of videos where psychopaths in the American prison system were shown videos of people walking down the street and asked who would they choose as prey. And in crowds of people, they would uniformly choose the same person. And they would be able to tell from their body language and their gestures that they were not presenting a sense of strength and confidence, but there was this uncertainty, this gullibility that was coming out even in the body languages. So they're keenly observant of other people, really, really good at it. And because they are without fear to a large degree, they'll take chances. They don't always learn from their mistakes, but they are very, very good at hiding. And remember, hiding within themselves. They don't give away the store. They'll wait a very long time. My friend said to me that the person who took me in had waited years for his opportunity. And they'll do that. They'll wait for the perfect moment to pounce and realize that if we are engaged emotionally with people, we do not see these tells. Emotions, any strong emotion actually makes us stupider, according to Griffin and Tyrrell, who are British psychologists. Human Givens theory, again, anytime we are really experiencing strong emotion, we are prone to black and white thinking and we miss things. For example, the 6-month honeymoon in a new relationship. We we tend to ignore the obvious bad stuff. We maximize the good stuff. We minimize the bad stuff. And the joking line I always say is, yes, Dad, I know he's a serial killer who just got out of prison, but he brought me some wonderful strawberries from the farmer's market. It's like emotion will cloud our judgment. And a lot of it is learning to calibrate, being aware as human beings. One of the cases I worked on was brought to me by a detective, and him and his wife were victimized by the psychopath. Even a detective, psychopaths will fool psychiatrists to let them out of prison. I mean, they're so good at this stuff that to think we can outthink them and outfox them it's the height of folly, really. So we just have to recognize that there's no emotion. There is zero empathy. Zero empathy. The emotion you'll typically get will be anger or frustration, but not love, not real love. They say when a psychopath goes to a funeral of a friend, he does not feel the pain of losing the friend. Instead, he will model the facial expressions and gestures of the other people present. So he makes a presentation as though he's feeling or she is feeling that emotion. It's a very interesting subject.
That sounds like it's almost has to, not that I'm trying to empathize with a psychopath, but it almost sounds like that's a very exhausting way to live. That if you're trying to put up these fronts constantly.
It would seem that way, Chris, but I don't think it is for them. I think it is so naturally a part of their being. They process information differently in their brains. Words like love and things like are not even processed the same way in their brain. It's just a remarkable thing. It is hardwired in, and I don't know that there's a psychiatrist in the world who can fix them. I don't think psychiatrists can fix psychopathy at all. And it's just yet another way that nice people are victimized, especially if we send signals of being victims. I just got an email from a friend of ours who goes to our little church, and he's in his early 80s, and he told me that he had been given $100,000 by the United Nations. And I, well, what? And he said, yeah. And he said, your name was on the list too. You're eligible for it. And I said, okay, what is this? Oh, they give money to children and, these building projects, but they also just give $100,000 to people who need it. And I said, do you actually have the $100,000? He said, no, I don't have it. But first he said, yes. And then he said, well, I don't have it, but I'm getting it very soon. And I said, what do you have to do to get it? And here's the scam. They were sending him a cashier's check for $100,000 US. And all he had to do was pay the $900 US for the security company to deliver it to him and hand it to him. And of course, that would go on his credit card. I mean, it boggles the mind to me as someone who's pretty security minded, the things that people fall for.
Yeah. But like you said, there's always that, like, I think even beyond psychopaths, it's almost every scam that I've talked to people about, there's always a very emotional element to it. That we know you're going to do good with this money. We know you're such an outstanding human being, and we know like life has been tough for you, and we want to help you. It's like, oh,
that's so
someone
true.
finally cares about me, or someone finally sees who I really am.
I mean, that's one of the three keys in Greek rhetoric, from going back to people like Aristotle and so on. They quantified these things, and that's pathos. We're bringing in emotions. And when we do an emotional appeal, empathic appeal, the guard goes down to a large degree. And that's one of the first things we should be aware of as people who are potential victims but don't have to be, is to recognize when the emotions are becoming engaged, our intelligence starts to drop through the floor. We are not as smart when we're experiencing any emotion. And that's really key as to one of the things, to be able to step back and say, hang on, let me think about this in a more objective fashion.
Do you think that's where it comes in a value of having those close personal allies in your life that can be more objective, that you're telling people about, that you're just talking to your life about, hey, I ran across this business opportunity. What do you think?
Yeah, you're bang on with that. It's key to have some close personal friends, and they will be the ones who will tell us the truth regardless of what we think. The level below that is people who will appease us. They're our friends, but they're more acquaintances. Real friends will do the hard stuff. They'll whip our appendix out when it's needed instead of telling us we need an aspirin. And we need people like that in our lives. But the scary thing is, Chris, this guy was one of those people in my life. And that's how clever they are at worming their way in. And and building those kinds of bridges. So I don't think we should go through like paranoid that, oh, everybody's out to get me. But we need to recognize that there are a lot of predators out there. My wife was on a subway in Toronto, and she's got very strong spider sense. And she just turned around, and on this crowded subway, there was a guy 40 feet away just staring at her, locked on her and not blinking. And she exited the subway, and she was aware he was following her. And she crossed over Yonge Street, which is the biggest street in Toronto. It's huge, and goes right up to James Bay. And she's crossed over, and he crossed over behind her. And she went into a store where she could phone. And eventually he had disappeared, but she picked up on the fact that he was tracking her. And I'm amazed how oblivious most people are to things like this. So step one, be aware of your surroundings all the time. You know, my friend Alan Bell is ex-British Special Forces. He's protected the royal family. I mean, he's 12 years in the SAS and 7 years in the Royal Marines. And he said, for women, he can't believe they even park in underground parking lots alone. It should be the last thing you do. And if you do, walk right in the middle, away from all the cars, where you can see if someone's approaching you. And if someone tries to rape you, roll underneath the car and hold onto the undercarriage and scream your head off. Scream words, help, help, I'm being killed. Don't just scream. People take it as a joke. But no woman in history has been raped underneath a car. You know, like there's things we can do. But the number one thing is going to be awareness online, which is the sort of thing you know all about. Awareness when you're in public, awareness when you're in your home, and recognize that some people want to take advantage and some people are extremely violent, will go to any lengths to do that.
So what sort of things should we be looking for in that awareness? Like how would we define something that's out of the norm of what we would expect?
Well, Gavin de Becker, who's one of the world's foremost authorities on security, he talks about the gift of fear. It's actually an excellent book. He says so many people have essentially damped down their intuition. They've damped down that God-given gift of something isn't right here. And I call it spider sense. I've got a really strong one because I've developed it over the years, especially as a martial artist. An example, there's a small town called Greeley, which is near Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And my friend had a house there years and years ago. And I had a presentation at University of Ottawa. I was arriving at his place about 11 p.m. He said, I'll leave the door unlocked. And I walked in the living room. There's just a night light on. I walked halfway across the room and my spider sense triggered. And I turned around and I don't know why. I looked behind the couch. And he was lying down behind the couch and was going to jump up and scare me. And he said, it's impossible. How could you know I was there? I said, I listened to these cues. And one of the things we can do is recognize those fear things are for our safety. They're to let us know something isn't right. We've got to learn not to avoid these signals. I talk about going through life with 3 color codes. And most of the time we're in green. Green means everything's copacetic, everything's okay, we're safe. As soon as we go to a new place, a new city, we should automatically mentally shift to yellow. Just meaning there's going to be some unknowns here. I'm not completely aware. Then if things start to get a bit odd, let's say we've got to walk past a big deserted area at night downtown. Now we should be going to orange. Orange means I'm on full alert. Red means there's something wrong. We should never go there. And you should always look to bringing things back to green as soon as you can, where there's no threat. It's okay to go through yellow temporarily if you can get to green, but you should not be staying in orange because orange leads to red. And that's all a matter of simply conditioning yourself. Ask questions. You're in a mall and somebody's sitting by himself and he looks odd. You ask yourself, why does he look odd? What is it I'm noticing here? Like what isn't making sense? Oh yeah, the guy looks dressed like a street person, but he's wearing a Rolex watch. And this has triggered unconscious associations. The first thing is to be aware, and to be aware behind the wheel of a car as well. I was at a traffic light turning into a large mall in Toronto. It was just coming up to sundown, and the car behind me honked at me because he thought I should have gone, and I didn't. There was another car approaching. He didn't notice. So I just ignored him. I pulled into the mall, and a minute later, I saw the same car again in my rearview mirror, and it set off a signal, and he came roaring up behind me, and the door opened, he jumped out of his car. Now, I don't know what it was. I jumped out of my car right away, and I had a tactical baton in the door. And I jumped out, snapped this thing open, and said, let's go. And he just whooped back in his car and was gone. Now, I don't know what his problem was, but I was aware that he was there. Now, he could have gotten to my car as I was opening the door when I didn't notice. It's look, leave, or lean. You have to be checking before you get out, not getting out of the car and then looking around. Even my own wife made the mistake, and she's got strong spider sense. In a parking lot, opened the door, and there was a guy there, and he got between the door and her before she could close the door again. I just wanted one small change, but it could have been a lot worse. So the number one thing is, if something goes wrong, and my friend Alan Bell, the soldier, he said, if something goes wrong, if there's a situation, it's because you screwed up. So that's the first thing, is recognizing. One of the things that your listeners would be wise to adopt is something I teach my martial arts student. It's called the witching hour. This one thing can protect you from all kinds of potentially violent confrontations and horrible things. After 11 p.m., in Western society, your chance of being in a violent encounter starts to climb rapidly. And it peaks probably around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then after 3 a.m., it drops rapidly again. So there's a window there where your chance of being in a violent encounter is way, way higher. And it starts about 11 p.m. And we call it the witching hour. And we say, wherever you got to be, get there by 11 p.m. If you're not out and about at that time, I'm sure I sound like a Canadian in my pronunciation, but if you're not walking around and going places you shouldn't be after 11 p.m., you're not likely to get into a problem. Or if you do have to go out at that time, you've got an event or something, make sure people know where you are, make sure you got your cell phone with you, make sure your car doors are locked, make sure you got a clear route home, and if possible, be with other people. It's when we break the rules that we set ourselves up for problems.
My wife and I always joke with our friends and whatnot that nothing good happens after midnight. But by midnight, you want to be home, in bed, hunkered down, and you're done well before midnight, because nothing good happens after midnight.
You're right on with that, Chris. Nothing good happens after midnight outside the house anyway. I got a friend who's a Louisiana deputy sheriff, and he says before bed every night, now he's an extreme case, he said he gets his Glock, goes through his entire house, every room, every spot that a human being could be hiding before he'll go to sleep. Now, that's an extreme case. Most of us will never have to live like that. But in his industry, he's made enemies over the years, and he has to be careful as a result of it. And, we don't want to be paranoid, because if our spider sense is set too high, then real problems are indistinguishable from the background. That's bad as well. In fact, it's like sometimes you go through an airport, or we used to before COVID, you go through an airport, and if they have the sensitivity set too high on metal detectors, you'll notice they're checking everybody, because everybody's setting it off. The fillings of their teeth are setting it off. Their wedding ring's setting it off. That is pointless then to even have the thing, because if you're going to do a body check on everybody, pat them down, why even have the device? And that's what happens if our spider sense is set too high. Everything becomes a problem. That's useless. We have to have it set high enough that we notice anomalies standing out from the background radiation. And that's what enables us to take the steps to be safe. I was in Las Vegas for HypnoThoughts Live, which is the biggest hypnosis conference in the world. I present there quite regularly. I was in the elevator of the Orleans Hotel going up at night, and I'd just done a presentation, and I was wearing a sports jacket and jeans, but I routinely wear steel-toed boots because I got a weapon with me all the time that way. It ups my defensive capability. And the door of the elevator opened, and two guys in their 20s with a girl in her 20s all got in together, and they wanted to show off to her. And my buddy was in the elevator with me. As they got in, he got out, and they kept going up. And 2 floors we passed, no sound. And then one of them looked at each other. One of them looked at me, and he said, "Oh, you're in trouble now. You're trapped with us." And he grinned at me. And I said, "Depends on how you define trouble. These are steel-toed boots." And they just both shut up and looked away right away. And it was the congruence. They said it with eye contact and intention. And he knew it would be a mistake. Now, they were just kidding around. But that comes from the ability to size up a situation and know when it's safe to not go somewhere at all, when it's safest to disengage, and when it's safest to fight for your life. I tell women all the time, if someone attempts to abduct you, you never go with them. Fight to the death right away at that instant, because If you are taken to a secondary crime scene, your chance of survival is almost non-existent. You must fight immediately with everything you've got. And I don't mean, try to throw him or try to punch him. I mean, frickin' blind him, tear his testicles off, bite his throat. You have to go ape shit if you're going to win this.
Do whatever you can right away.
Yep, you won't get a second chance. And that's why self-defense is nonsensical, because if you're defending, you've already let the person make the first move. That's the street fighter's advantage. He knows it's on before you do. So if you're defending, you're always a move behind him. We have to recognize, stay out of his range. And the way you win a confrontation is to attack, not defend. Once you know it's on, attack with surprise and aggression and speed, and make sure he can't follow you.
And I suspect when you have a mugger or someone who's attacking you, that is not probably not their expected result from you if you turn around and attack aggressively.
That's exactly right. We want to turn the other person into prey. And we can hardwire that in by having a few very simple moves. Like complex martial arts will not work in the street. They will not work because they depend on fine motor skills and complex motor skills that when we have adrenaline overload, and we're simply not going to be able to do them. You cannot put a key in a lock, to open your car door when you have a huge adrenaline dump in your system. Your hand will shake too much. So you have to depend on gross motor skills, kicking, edge of the hand strikes, fingers in the eyes, things that you can do no matter how much adrenaline you have. And you don't hit the guy and step back to see what happened. You press the attack, put him on his heels, you're on your toes, driving him forward. And when it's done, you make sure he's not going to follow you. And it's brutally effective. We recommend something called beer canning the person. If someone is trying to injure you or kill you, you don't know. You don't want to wait and say, oh, I didn't think he was trying to kill me. I just thought he was, being a jerk. Well, if he's going to attack you, beer canning is something we've all done. You put a beer can on the ground or a pop can, soda pop, stomp it with your foot and flatten it. That's what you got to do. So once the person is taken out, we recommend you beer can their knee or their ankle. You cause an injury so they cannot follow you. Mm-hmm. You don't have to kill a person, but statistically, if you can increase the distance between you and another person to 20 feet, they usually won't follow you.
You're too far away and it becomes too noticeable.
Yes. Yeah, too obvious, too noticeable. But again, if you have any kind of confrontation, it means you're screwed up. It's screwed up somewhere, miss some kind of signal. And that's the main thing, tuning our awareness and recognize. If I'm on a subway train, and I'm not usually, but when I used to teach at downtown Toronto, I'd take the subway in so my wife could have our car. We're a one-car family. And I'd see someone get on, and I'm always evaluating. I don't sit with my back where somebody can choke me. I got my back against the wall. Not that I'm paranoid, but I'm prepared. And I'm automatically seeing someone comes in. That guy looks like he's stoned. I'm watching. Is it cracked? Like, what? Is he violent? I'm just calibrating who's coming in and who's going out. And it's largely unconscious now. And I'll ask my students, I'll say, okay, we'll be on a subway or we're walking downtown. I'll say, if that guy there went nuts, how would you take him out? What would you do? He's got a heavy coat on. You can't hit his body. It's not going to work. You're going to have to do something to save your own life. And a big part of this is just the obvious, being physically fit. Because if something goes past 30 seconds in the street, you'll get exhausted very, very quickly. Again, best to avoid.
So I want to ask you two questions that are kind of winding back a little bit. When we talked about being aware of your surroundings and kind of trusting your gut in situations and calibrating that to the right level, not where you're, a bird flies by and you're getting out your baton, or, the guy runs by with a shotgun and you don't even notice. Like, where should we be thinking that level should be in terms of, if I go to a mall or I go to an outdoor mall, how often should I be listening to my gut? Should it be every 5th person, every 10th person, every 100th person, once a day?
There's an easy way to set it up, Chris, and it's simply this. You want to make it so it becomes an unconscious response. Mm-hmm. When it's unconscious, that's when you got spider sense. Something will jar you, will catch you, catch your attention. The way to get there is, I tell people to work with Edward T. Hall's Proxemics. So Proxemics, safety is created by distance, with everything from knives to atomic bombs. The more distance you have, the safer you are. So in order for someone to use a knife or an impact weapon on, they have to be very close. And we start to think of things in terms of range. So there's social range outdoors, where people are outside our kicking range. They're outside where we could reach each other, maybe 8 feet away. People pass each other on the street. They don't get too close. Then we have a range that is more a colloquial range with friends and people we know, or people we've just met at a party or something. They're not really close. They're standing a few feet away. And that is the kind of range that feels safe when we know people. Then we're going to get an intimate range, which we're sometimes forced into by things like elevators. Mm-hmm. But also people who know each other well will stand closer, maybe 3 feet away. And only are we in physical contact when we're very comfortable with someone. The first thing to be aware of is when people begin to enter our closer range. That should be the initial alarm that gets our attention, or someone who is rapidly approaching us from any direction. And the way to do that is we have to make scans, so scans become natural. We shouldn't be, you shouldn't be wearing earphones when you're walking down the street listening to music. You've shut down a channel that can be warning you about someone approaching or a siren going off, whatever it is. So we open our channels of awareness, and we recognize anything that stands out from the background as unusual. And as it begins to move in closer to us, our awareness heightens. So we think of it in terms of range. Things that are far away aren't that important. They can be evaluated. We can determine if we're going to take a turn somewhere else. But again, we're going to be moving through areas that are going to give us green lights, or at worst yellow lights. We're not going to move into orange lights and red lights that could be potentially horrendous. I'd rather walk 10 minutes out of my way than go across maybe a vacant parking lot at night in a rough area of a city. It's just stupid. There's no need to do that. Yeah. So being aware of the distances at first will start to set up our spider sense.
Okay. So we have gotten really far off of psychopathy. But all this is still immensely interesting. So let me roll back to one other question that I had. You were talking about interviewing people or talking with prisoners and having them identify who they would target out of a crowd. And they very, very consistently picking out the same people. What were those individuals that were being picked out doing or not doing?
The one thing that was named was an asymmetrical walk, which is very, very interesting. And what that actually means is when I walk down the street, I've trained myself to walk like I own the freaking street, because people who are psychopaths, people who are predators, are looking for easy prey. They don't want to have to fight to get your wallet. They want to intimidate or do something quickly with someone who is going to be weak and easy to dominate. So when I walk, I swing my arms, I look from side to side. I'm sending a message that I'm strong, that I'm congruent, or at least I'm going to be a problem if you mess with me. These people in the video, it was all women, were walking in an asymmetrical way, walking sort of looking to the side, not paying attention what's in front. Maybe one arm could be up like this. It gave a signal of lack of congruence or some kind of uncertainty or only a vague awareness of surroundings. And that sends a very strong prey signal. My wife was walking up the road, I can actually see from my window here, right by the high school. No, it's just high school kids. There were 3 kids out there, 16, 17 years old, throwing snowballs and just at signs and at cars as they passed. And she was coming up the other side of the road, and they looked over at her and they said something, and she just walked like she owned the street and stared right at them. Mm-hmm. And not one of them threw anything at her, because she's sending a signal, I'm not a victim. You mess with me at your peril. Well, the people in the video were not sending that. They were sending a victim signal. It's almost like some people almost have a target on them saying, take advantage of me. And, we don't have the same number of guns in Canada as you're going to get in the U.S. They tend to be quite rare. But people are still mugged, and people are still hurt, and people are still taken advantage of. I mentioned before about the guy who was thinking he was getting $100,000 from the United Nations. I mean, it is so obviously ridiculous. I can't understand how that wouldn't even occur to him. So again, our number one weapon is avoidance and awareness. If we're aware, then we're going to detect threats before they become really serious. And if we're aware of our surroundings, then we don't have to go into situations that'll be threatening in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's anytime something is out of the ordinary, that should be a particularly big red flag to us. Something's going on.
That's right. Well, but now let me ask you, Chris, because this is more your area of expertise than mine. How would this sort of thing apply online?
Well, I mean, like, I think what you talked about in terms of, your friend who got an email or some suspicious contact says, hey, we have this large amount of money for you. Our first thought needs to be, why in the world would someone give me? Why would how would the United Nations even know about me? And why would they want to give me a large amount of money? And then why would it cost me money to get the money? Like, it's not like when I get a paycheck, my bank says, hey, in order to get your paycheck, you need to give us $900.
Right.
I mean, yeah, there's transaction fees on some things in our lives, but there's almost never transaction fees. And I think the reason why those transaction fees work is because someone is seeing dollar signs. The greed, the emotion is kicked in, and they're now starting to look at that. Well, I can afford to give up $900 in order to get 9,000 or 90,000 or 900,000. So it's easy math. And those are the things you got to watch out for. Like, even when you're talking before, the emotional, someone's, hey, here's this really great thing or this really bad thing. There's the urgency of, like, if you don't do something right now, either something worse is going to happen to you or you're going to miss out on this other opportunity.
The psychological, trick, which is the appeal to scarcity, and everybody uses it. And the weird thing, I mean, we use it in our online trainings and that, act now and you save this money, and implication is if you don't, you won't, which is true. But we are all vulnerable to these things, even if we know about them. That's what's so bizarre about it. You put a timer on an offer online and see the timer going down, and I know what they're doing, and it will still affect me. And so much. Go ahead.
And that's the funny thing. Someone was talking to me, and I was telling them about these common traits that you see in scams and these things that are almost always consistent. He goes, "That sounds an awful lot like marketing to me."
Isn't that the truth? I saw the strangest example of this, and this sounds like a joke, but my specialty is hypnosis and influence and these things. And my wife and I were at a bank in downtown Toronto. I won't say which one it was. But there was a poster in the lobby of this enormous bank, and it was a poster for one of their products that they were endeavoring to get people to sign up for some kind of loan or whatever. But this was the exact wording, Chris. I have it exact because I couldn't believe it. It said this: borrow to get ahead so you don't fall behind. Now, what? Isn't borrowing going further in debt? And isn't going further in debt falling further behind by anyone's estimation? Yeah, but they know it works.
What was Dave Ramsey's expression? You cannot borrow your way out of debt.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Or something along those lines. Because it's like everybody's telling you, well, if you just borrow more money, you can solve your debt problems. It's like, no. You need to borrow less money because that's what got you into the problem to begin with.
Right. And you know what you said about, I'm just adjusting my earphones here. I had one die, but I think you can still hear me all right. One of the things that you said that really rung home with me was when you said about, the offer, like, why would the UN even know about me? Why would the UN be giving me money? Like, all of these questions. This is sort of the online equivalent of someone at the door of your house, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you want to stop them at the door. We have a saying in martial arts and security, and it's a tautology. But, it's like saying it is what it is, which gives no information. But it makes sense anyway. You'll know what I mean. We say you don't let them in because once they're in, they're in. That's it. We want to keep people out of our houses who shouldn't be here. We want to keep them out of our lives, out of our bank accounts, and we want to keep them off our computers too.
Well, it's my wife is one of those people that I don't care who's at the door. If I don't know them and I'm not expecting them, I'm not going to open the door, period. I'm not even going to go to the door and say who's there. I'll look at the camera, see who it is, and just utterly ignore them if they're not supposed to be there. And
right.
You don't have to worry about the criminal in your house if you don't let them in your house.
Yes, exactly. About 5 years ago, our online business got an email from a guy, and he was in France, and he wanted to study with us, and he was clearly a bit nuts. And it didn't work out. And he kept writing and he kept writing. We finally said, look, we can't help you. And he said, I want you to teach me hypnosis so I can find the Brazilian girl I met in a bar years ago who was the girl of my dreams. I said, hypnosis doesn't work like that. Can't help you. We told him 1 billion times. So he started blocking his emails and he started writing through a different email address. We blocked that. Then he started phoning through some internet protocol, my business phone in Toronto, and phoning me. So it got so bad. I got Bell Canada involved. I got Toronto Police Service involved. We had to cancel my business line that I'd had for 30 odd years. Oh. Then he somehow got our home number and he started phoning me at like 3 a.m. Toronto time and saying, I want you to learn me hypnosis. I can find the girl of my dreams. It was a freaking nightmare. And eventually, because I just kept hanging up, and here's one of the keys. The way you disconnect from someone who's a problem is by disconnecting. Now, it sounds stupid, but you don't say to them, look, I've told you 12 times, stop calling me. You tell them once, then you never tell them again. You never have contact with them again. You never answer their questions. You don't answer their emails. When someone's a problem, you tell them just once that you're disconnecting and never tell them again. Because every time you say, look, I've told you before, you've just hit the reset button again. Yeah. And that's the key. Tell them once and never talk to them. One of my business partners, the one who ripped me off, sent me a big package in the mail with no explanation. I just said, get out of my life. I said, Jesus, get this out of my life. Threw it in the garbage. My wife said, we're not even opening it. I said, no, I don't know what it is. I'm not even opening it. I told him I have no contact with him. And that means I won't even open something he sent me. That was it.
Yeah. And I think those are the things you have to kind of stand your ground once you decide I'm not going to engage with this scammer or this person I don't trust and stick to it.
It can be difficult. It can be hard, especially when it's someone who's had influence in our lives, a foot in the door for a long time. And it can feel like we're losing something, but we can lose a lot more than a supposed friendship. And in any case, who wants to be friends with someone who's manipulative and freaking evil? One of the most empowering things we can do, Chris, is to periodically fire people from our lives. Like I say that as a therapist, get toxic people out of your life. We give them a chance. We talk to them. We give them another chance. But if they're proven to be toxic, you just get rid of them. I've got a stepbrother who's a low-level criminal, and he cannot be trusted, and he has nothing to do with my life. I won't let him in. And life is too short. My mom died at 53, my dad at 57. I'm coming up to 68. I'm past the expiry date in my family, and I'm going to enjoy my life. I'm not going to let lunatics and idiots and psychos in. So we have to be prepared to fire people who are basement people, who drag us down, and support people who are balcony people, those who lift us up. They're the ones we need to spend time with.
Those are great words. I wanted to come back because I feel like we didn't finish the story about your business partner. What was it about? Maybe this is a little hard to do in an audio format. What about his writing made you realize, oh my goodness, this is a problem?
Oh, I can tell you, and I can explain it well enough that you should be able to pick up on this. One of the traits he had in his handwriting is one of the worst traits you can have. It's called the felon's claw. It's actually found, according to Andrea McNichol, in the handwriting of 80% or more of people in the American penitentiary system. Now, I don't know if this appears in the handwriting as the personality changes or how it happens, but it is definitely there. And when we make a letter, I'm going to actually draw it for you because you're looking at me on video here, so you'll understand what I mean here. I'm getting a Sharpie.
And for the audience, I will screen capture this and show it to you in the show notes.
So here's a letter G. It could be a G, a Y, any letter that has a descending loop that goes down into the unconscious. Here's one with a felon's claw. Notice there's no loop.
Up a little higher?
Sure.
There
you got that?
Yes.
You see this point here. It must have a point and gush back like this. Now, that's the trait, and it's a trait of manipulation. Some people who do graphology, I don't know if this is correct or not, but it makes sense. They see that as someone who has a lot of guilt and does crazy things so that they'll be punished, which is kind of interesting. As the reason behind it, I don't know. But many, many years ago, I had a signed copy of Robert K. Ressler's book, Whoever Fights Monsters. And he was the man who invented the term serial killer. He was the consultant for Silence of the Lambs. And John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer in the U.S., had drawn a picture of himself or made a painting of himself in his clown suit that he would wear when he'd kill these young boys. And he'd given it to Robert K. Ressler. And I knew it was signed. And before seeing the picture, I said, it'll have the felon's claw in his name. And John Wayne Gacy had a felon's claw in the Y of Wayne. And he had a felon's claw in the Y of Gacy, big, huge ones. It was just intrinsic to his personality. And that was the thing that my business partner had in his writing. And he had unstable slant. Some letters slanted forward, some letters slanted back. When you see that a lot, especially in the same word, that's someone who is switching back and forth between different ego states that are becoming executive, almost like subpersonalities, but not multiple personality disorder. We all have different ego states.
Days that we feel one way versus another way?
Yeah, we all have 50 to 150 subpersonalities, and they're digital. They're neural pathways burned into our brain, but only one of them can be executive at any given moment. So the ego state I have when I'm playing with my Egyptian Mao cat is not the ego state I want executive when I'm teaching jiu-jitsu, because it would be the wrong one for the job. So the key is people who have multiple ego states showing up in the same sample of writing are switching back and forth. It's a real sign of emotional instability.
Very interesting. And
rapists very often have very strong backhanded writing.
Interesting. Oh, I'm going to have
embezzlers have numbers that are weird, and I think bombers have really tiny writing.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
But tiny writing is also a sign of concentration, and you need concentration if you're going to build bombs, I've heard.
Yeah, I would imagine that it is a detailed experience that you do not want to make mistakes when doing.
That's one would think so. That's right.
Otherwise, you eliminate yourself from the skill set.
Right.
So, is there any parting advice you have for the audience today, whether it's psychopathy or just how you behave when you're out in public, or how you interact with people? What's one final bit of wisdom you can impart?
Well, it's a real simple thing, Chris, but it's a good one if you take it to heart. You can't cure psychopaths. You can't change them. You will run across them eventually at some point in your life. Hopefully they don't do much damage in your life. But the revenge that we have as healthy, functional people is to not obsess about them, to have a good life despite them. And that's what I did. I didn't let the business partner and the loss of all the money and everything get to me. I decided to follow the advice and have a good life despite him. And that's the best thing we can do. Don't let them wreck your life.
That's awesome. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolute pleasure, my friend.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please take a few moments and write a review by visiting easyprey.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Mike Mandel can be found at easyprey.com/52.